Wanted to do today is outline the prayer service, the Shmona Esrei that we recite on Rosh Hashanah during Mussaf. And it is a different structure than the normal Shmona Esrei. Shmona Esrei in the halacha is called tefillah because it's the central part of the prayer service. Now, the Mussaf begins with the words Hineni He'ani Mima'as. It's a haunting melody. Behold, I stand here, impoverished in good deeds, perturbed and frightened in fear of him who is enthroned upon the praises of Israel. I have come to stand and to plead before you in behalf of your people Israel, who have appointed me their messenger, even though I am not worthy or qualified for the task. And this is said by the cantor. It's actually a beautiful prayer where the cantor, the Baal Tfilah, expresses the humility, and that introduces the Mussaf. Now, the first section of the Mussaf, except for some of the insertions during these days, Achrenu L'chaim, remember us for life, is very similar, identical, except for those insertions, to the way we begin the Shmona Esrei during the week. They're paragraphs of praise of God. Before you enter and get into the real discussion, the atmospherics are set up before we come and really get down to what we want to talk about. And it is then, after the first three blessings, that the Shmona Esrei of Mussaf, of the additional service, it wanders off. And it begins with another introductory prayer, probably my favorite, Ochila Lo'el. And in a book, Holistic Prayer, that was written years back, each chapter has a story. And I read to you this introductory story, page 33 in Holistic Prayer. The rabbi was standing before his congregation. Yom Kippur was ending. Over and over, he mumbled the Aleph Bet. His disciples were stunned. The rabbi knew Torah by heart. He knew every prayer by rote. Why was he reciting the Hebrew alphabet? Later that evening, he explained, there are times when the words of prayer are enough, but then there are times when one does not know the words. All we can do is express feelings. And then there are times, like now, when the situation is so dreadful we don't even know what to feel. All we can do is turn to God, fully reliant upon him, and humbly declare, I don't know the words. I'm not even sure what to feel. All I can do is recite the Aleph Bet and beg you, Lord our God, you know the letters. Please, please, rearrange them so they clearly spell out what I should be asking for. And that's the Ochila Lo'el. When one looks at the service, it seems to be an intrusion. What is this Ochila Lo'el? How does it find its place in the Shmona Esrei? But as I mentioned, just as the Hineni Ma'as, the prayer said by the cantor, introduces the Shmona Esrei of Mussaf, of the additional service of Rosh Hashanah, so too when we enter into the domain of the different blessings with different texts that are unique to Rosh Hashanah, not said during the year, it also has an opening prayer. And it opens with these words, Ochila La'el, I put my hope in the Almighty. Achale Fanav, I plead before him. Esh Allah mimenu, I request from him. Ma'anei lashon, I request of God that he give me the gift of language. In other words, we put our trust in God to know what is in our interests and to help us to articulate our needs. It's a magnificent prayer. And recently it's become quite well known through music, a melody put to it by Yishai Ribo, which our unparalleled Rebelli also sings. So I've asked Shuli, who is just remarkable, if Shuli could play this nigun for everyone. So sit back to Yishai Ribo's song, and he is the Jewish artist who fills Madison Square Garden every year. So he's among the greatest of the greatest.
I'm happy to go back to the Yishai Ribo one, but the same tune I found a cappella, and I wondered if you may prefer that. So
whatever you wish.
We're going to do that one.
Okay.
Hold on a moment.
Tehillah. Hashem. Hashem, Sept tiftar, Ufi yagid, Tehilatecha, Ufi yagid, Tehilatecha.
I'm sorry, Rabbi, you're muted. I had to mute everyone. I'm sorry.
Oh, did they hear me say it was awful?
There we go.
In other words, we put our trust in God to know what is in our interest and to help us articulate our needs. And the second sentence of the prayer that we heard so beautifully sung, the prayer continues, Le'adam marche lev, u'me Hashem maneh lashon. A person prepares the thoughts in his mind. We think we know what we're looking for, but proper speech, but proper askings come from the Lord. This can be interpreted to mean that a person may believe he or she is planned for life, but ultimately knowing what to ask for, knowing what is best comes from God. It is nothing less than the constant refrain of my bubby, my grandmother, a Mensch tracht und Gott lacht. A person plans and God laughs. There's a story told about a great country singer, Garth Brooks, who apparently is a very religious man. And even when he was a youngster in his teen years, he was a believer. And he tells the story, and it made it into one of his songs. They used to pray to God, and he had one request that his child's sweetheart say yes when he would ask her out to the prom. But it wasn't to be. And he went on and he married and had children, was very, very happy in life. But he always wondered, what about that girl that I knew from my teen years? And at one of his extravagant, magnificent shows, the woman, his teenage sweetheart from decades before, showed up, and they had a chance to speak. This was his moment. And after they were through, he looked up to God and he said, "Dear God, thank you for not listening to my prayers. Thank you for turning me down." And so before we get into the service, we were talking to God. We're struggling. What are the words? What are the proper words that we can shape that will make a difference, not only for God, but for ourselves? And what follows are three beautiful paragraphs, through three beautiful prayers that make the Rosh Hashanah davening stand out. They'll be followed by the last section, which is a section of Thanksgiving, which, except for the insertions, are very similar to the way we daven every day, 3 times a day. But I want to focus on these three different paragraphs. They really speak to a theology, to a broader theology. The first is called Malchliot, and it opens with the paragraph in which we say, Al kein nikaveh lecha Adonai Elohecha. We therefore put our hope in you, Adonai, our God. And you can always tell the meaning of a prayer by its seal. And this paragraph ends, Baruch atah Adonai, melech al kol haaretz, ruler over the whole earth, bekadesh Yisrael v'yom hazikaron, that you, O God, sanctify Israel on this Rosh Hashanah. This theology is a theology where we put forth the first pillar of our foundational relationship with God. And that is, we acknowledge that God is the creator of the world. God created the world. That's why the paragraph is called Malchuyot, rulership, in which we declare God as the ruler, as the creator. And I would suggest that this is the theology of love. In love, for us, and I would argue even for God, it's not that God is limited, but God doesn't have to love. But if God chooses to love, which he chooses, whatever choice means for God, it means that there has to be an other. There has to be a fellow, a sister whom God loves. Hence, a God of love creates. And in this new book, which I'm trying to pen, not so simple these days, called Judaism, A Theology of Love, I write the following. My love of God is inspired by the beauty of the world. Now, there are many approaches, but this is the first approach that we're presenting. Many have argued that the probability of all the infinite conditions necessary for the world to be so improbable that it defies mathematical probability. Suppose there were 22% oxygen in the air instead of 21%. The earth quickly would burn up. How is it that humans expel carbon dioxide needed by plants, while plants reciprocate, expelling oxygen needed by humans? And the world sits as it moves on a precise angle. Otherwise, it would spin out of control. And then an early anecdote from my rabbinate. 50 years ago, in my first pulpit in St. Louis, I shared this idea, which some call the teleological argument, the argument of design, or the argument of order. A young Ron Bird, who went on to become one of the great neuro-ophthalmologists of our time. He was chairman of the department. He moved from St. Louis to New York, right here in Montefiore, came forward, and I'll never forget this, lovingly sharing. I agree with your argument, he said, with one caveat. I am a doctor of the eye. I know that there are billions of cells necessary for the eye to function properly. The eye, he continued, has become my gateway to God. Understanding how it works reminds me, while I know I do not know, only God knows how it miraculously all comes together. And then I write, the world is beautiful, oh so beautiful. Our task is to keep it beautiful and to fulfill our role as co-creators with God, to make the world more beautiful. As I've reached my octogenarian years, when looking at the exquisite beauty of God's creation, I'm overcome by its beauty, and overcome knowing that sooner rather than later, it will no longer be mine to enjoy. That is the essence of the first paragraph. Malchuyot, from the word melech, God is the creator of the world. And with that, we move into the second paragraph. It is called Zichronot, remembers. Indeed, it begins with the words, Ata zocher masei olam. You remember, you see, you recall the dealings of women and men in today's world. Ufoked kol yitzurei kedem. And you also consider the behavior of all those who lived in early times and all those who live today. And it ends, as we pointed out, the seal of a blessing is the microcosm of what the blessing is about. Baruch atah Adonai, blessed art thou, O Lord, Zocher HaBrit, you remember the covenant. Now, God is the creator. Our first paragraph is God unilaterally functioning in the world. God is the creator. Now, there are those like the deists who believe that God created the world, but then withdrew. God has nothing to do with the ever ongoing process of the world. This is rejected in Jewish theology. God is not only the creator of the world, but God enters into a covenantal relationship with all of humankind. That is to say, God remains involved. God is not only the Melech, the ruler, but he is not only the Molech, the ruler, but he is the Zocher. God is involved every step of the way. As a matter of fact, out of love, God steps back to make room for us so that we can be co-creators with God in the ongoing processes of the world. And that co-creator function is what covenant is all about. Covenant is a contract, not between two people, but between God and humankind. And that's what the second paragraph is all about. When one thinks about it, a mystical thought, when our children were very little, they used to say, Abba, if God is everywhere, then we're stepping on God. How is there room for us? And in one of the most beautiful thoughts in Kabbalistic thought, this is Lurianic Kabbalah, God, when creating the world, withdrew. That's what's called tzimtzum. He contracted in order to make room for humankind. That is, the contraction itself is a statement of love. I make room for humankind, and I ask human beings, be a co-creator together. God says to each of us, let's make this world. Let's make this world a most beautiful, beautiful world. I used to have a few lines on my desk. I don't know where it vanished. It was a dialogue between two people. And person A says to person B, sometimes I'm so upset with God. I want to ask God, why is there so much poverty in the world? Why is there so much racism in the world? Why is there so much sickness in the world? Why is there so much hatred in the world? And the second person says, well, that's a good question. Why don't you ask God that question? And person one says, because I'm afraid that God will ask me the same question. In fact, the first question in the Torah is God says, Ayeka. God says to Adam, and we're all Adam. Adam is the microcosm of all of humankind. God asks, Ayeka, are you doing your share? I'm involved. God says, I want you to be involved. In fact, the Talmud says in Shabbat that God has given us freedom of choice. And so if we opt to do evil, God says, Pochim lo, God allows us, even if it's against what God wishes. God doesn't want people to do evil. But the same Talmudic verse says, if we proactively do good, Messiah lo, then God's partnership is an active participation. I think it was Salk who discovered the polio vaccine, and I don't think he ever got the Nobel Prize for medicine, unfortunately, but he received many, many awards and accolades. And he was told, you're so brilliant. And he said, you think I did this with my own mind? I chanced upon it. Whatever I did, it was with the help of a higher power. And that is the second piece. The first was a God of love. To love, you need another, so God creates the world. The second love is that a God of love doesn't leave the world be, but he enters into a covenantal relationship with humankind. The same God who loves is a God who is the God who establishes a covenant, not only with Abraham and Sarah, with the Jewish people, but with all people, with all people. And with that, we move into the third paragraph. And the third paragraph is a paragraph that, believe it or not, deals with commandments. It opens with Anta nigleta banan kvodecha. You were revealed in your cloud of glory. Min hashamayim hishmata kolecha. From the heavens, you let hishmatam, you let them hear your voice. You gave the commandments. You gave the Torah. And this is the third step. As a matter of fact, again, the seal of this blessing is Baruch Atah Adonai, Shomea Kol Truat Amo Yisrael B'Rachamim. You remember the call of the shofar of Sinai. You remember giving us the commandments. And I want to underscore two things. First of all, the commandments, while given to the Jewish people, were not meant for the Jewish people to hold them for themselves while blocking them from humankind. All of humankind is obligated in the Zayin Mitzvot B'nai Noach and the fundamental laws of morality. And that's shared with everyone. And those seven, according to many authorities, constitute many hundreds within each one of these branches, are so many more. And so God's command is to us. Maybe we have Shabbat and Kashrut and whatever, but to all of humankind, there are the larger laws of what is called ethical monotheism. And secondly, to the Martin Bubers of the world who suggested a God who is giving so many commandments can't be a God who loves, because the commandments have to be so meticulously observed. And I'm not just talking about the ritual, I'm talking about interpersonal ethics. We're finishing now in 2 weeks the whole section of Nezikin in the Talmud, which deals with interpersonal law. They are as fastidious, they are as meticulous as the laws of ritual, which govern perhaps our relationship with God. The laws of interest, the laws of business, the laws of torts are very, very, very precise. And so Bupa would say, if God loves us, why are these laws so nitty-gritty? And I would humbly disagree. I think it's the opposite, that a God of love commands. There you have it. There you have this theology. The first of the three central blessings is a God of love creates. Poems are made by fools like thee, wrote Joyce Kilmer, but only God can make a tree. But the God who creates remains involved. The God who loves is a covenantal God, a God who asks us, Ayeka, where are you? And while on Tisha B'Av we say, Echa, where are you? Echa, where are you? How did this happen? When vocalized slightly differently is Ayeka. We're in constant dialogue with God. That story. Why don't you ask God why there's poverty and racism? Because I know God's going to ask me the same question. I have a right to demand answers from God, but God has a right to demand answers from me. And it's my contention that the more mature humankind becomes, in many ways we've not matured, the more, as a child grows up, the more is expected of us. So the God of love creates. The God of love enters into a covenantal relationship. And thirdly, that God gives us direction. It's a God of love who commands. And friends, maybe that's why after each of these sections, we blow the shofar. The shofar is a musical instrumentation. When one hears the shofar, you could feel the power of the ancient past of the shofar being blown. And after the first of the three in which we coronate God, we do what was done at coronations. The trumpets are blasted. Here the shofar is blasted. And after the second section, which speaks of God, who lovingly enters into a covenant with us, we blow the shofar, but here the shofar is a softer sound. It's a romantic sound. It's meant to be the sound of the flute of a lover and a beloved playing the instrument for each other, saying to each other, we have a together mission, a common purpose, a common goal. And so we blow the shofar again. And finally, the God of love, the shofar, not only coronates God, and the God of love not only enters into a covenant with us. The shofar is a beautiful flute, but the God of love offers us direction, commands, and this is the shofar of Sinai. And I close with a prayer because ultimately, years back, certainly during the Soviet Jewry movement, when we would call out, let my people go now, let my people go now. And that's a mantra that I think is a better mantra than when we call out for the hostages, bring them home now, bring them home now. Bring them home places the onus on the Israeli government, perhaps. Let them go puts the onus where it belongs, on Hamas. Let them go now. And every time we ended the shofar blast of Rosh Hashanah, and certainly the final blast of Yom Kippur, the shofar had a different message. It was the shofar of redemption. It was the shofar, uvayom hahu yitaka b'shofar gadol. On that day, the great shofar will be sounded. Va'u ha'ovdim be'eretz Ashur, v'hanidachim be'eretz Mitzrayim. And the people who have nowhere to go, those who are off in Ashur, in Assyria, and in Egypt, Vishachavu Lashem Bahar HaKodesh. And humankind will come to Jerusalem, a place, God willing, of peace. V'naharu sham kol hagoyim. Like a river flows, people will flow, people will stream into Jerusalem. And we will declare, V'chitetu chavrotam le'itim, v'chanitoteim lemasmerot. And the pruning, the spears will become utensils of pruning, and will declare, Lo yisa goy el goy cherev. No nation will lift up a sword against another nation. Emblazoned on that Isaiah wall downtown near the United Nations, which has not been true, of course, to its mission, to its responsibility. And that's the Tekiyah Gedolah. It's the call of redemption. It's the call of freedom. It's the call of peace. Tekiyah. And please, if anybody has some thoughts to share.